All right, thank you. How we doing on the mic? Is that too loud? Okay, not too loud? Okay, great. Afternoon, everyone. My name is Stuart Jackson. I'm an employee of CBD. Been practicing law for about 30 years. And over the course of those 30 years, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of businesses, some very large and some very small. And I'd say in the last 5 to 10 years, I've had a lot of opportunities to work with startups. And it's been really interesting to work with startups, to see a business that's just been created, that's trying to get off the ground, get things going. What I see a lot from an HR perspective is a business that is so focused on trying to get the business going that they either forget about the HR angle, or they don't even know about the HR obligations. It's kind of like, not knowing what you don't know. And that can be very dangerous because very small businesses, even when you have just 2 or 3 employees, can be subject to a variety of state and federal employment. For instance, if you just have 2 or 3 employees, chances are you're going to be covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act or the Arkansas Minimum Wage Act, which deals with overtime and minimum wage. You're also going to be covered by a certain statute that prohibits race discrimination. And that's just, you've got 3 employees, you get hauled on the court. And a lot of people, I don't think, realize it. I think, oh, we're too small, no one's going to do anything. I've seen it happen. Get up to 9 employees, and then I think things really start to get serious. And by the way, how many people in here, work at a facility or work for a company that has fewer than 10 employees? I'm just curious to know. Anyone? How about fewer than 20? 30? Okay, 40? How many of you work for a facility that has at least 50 employees? Okay. Well, when you hit 9, you're going to be covered by the Arkansas Civil Rights Act. And that prohibits race, gender, disability, national origin, and religious discrimination. When you hit 15, you're going to be covered by 2 federal statutes, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, 1964, and the ADA. They're pretty much the same as the Arkansas Civil Rights Act, except pregnancy discrimination kicks in at 15 as well. You get to 20 employees, then you have to deal with the Age Discrimination in Employment. And that protects individuals who are 40 years of age or older from age discrimination. And then when you hit 50, when you hit 50 employees, you have to deal with the Family Medical Leave, which mandates up to 12 weeks of leave, and sometimes up to 26 weeks of leave, due to a serious health condition of an employee or a family member, due to a pregnancy, or due to a pregnancy and a birth, or through an adoption as well. So, there are a lot of statutes out there that come into play, and come into play pretty quickly in the lifespan of a new business. And I see over and over again these new businesses getting off the ground, doing a great job, and they get blindsided by your CHR. They get blindsided by wage and hour. Talk about wage and hour real quickly. My thought has been, I'm going to talk to you guys about these really big landmines last year. These things that explode in the face of small employers. And so hopefully kind of give you a heads up, give you a head start, so that you can maybe get ahead of it before you have to deal with it. Wage and hour. Again, remember, you can just have 2 or 3 employees be covered by the wage and hour. Exempt versus non-exempt employees. If an employee is exempt, that means they can be salaried, they're not eligible for overtime. If they're non-exempt, that means they're hourly and they get paid over. They get paid over. A lot of people screw that up. A lot of businesses screw that up.
So, Steve, if I might jump in right here. So, one of the things that a lot of people think when they're talking about classification of positions is that just because an employee earns a salary, that they're exempt from overtime, and that is not always the case. There's certain exemptions that make a person exempt from overtime, and so there's categories. I think there's executive, administrative, I think there's an outside sales category, a couple others. But just because a position is paid a salary does not mean that they are an exempt position, exempt from overtime.
Great example that great an example that I like to give is, let's say you have sweep the facility. You could give that person the title of vice president. You could pay that person $250,000 a year. That would still not make that individual exempt. And I can't imagine what the overtime is for someone making $250,000 a year. So, and Angela's right. I mean, it's the exception, not the rule. When you have someone who is exempt from overtime, they have to be doing something pretty darn important in the business. They have to be managing 3 or more people.
2 or more full-time employees, and so as you're crafting those job descriptions, you really have to look at it and think about what their responsibilities will be before you can determine whether that position is going to be a truly exempt position, or if they're non-exempt, you could make them an hourly employee in most cases. Sure. So I think the 2 biggest challenges that I faced, and I joined NSM in April of 2020. I think they actually hired their first few employees in March the year prior. But the things that I have faced and found to be most challenging in the cannabis industry have been um, the lack of vendors that we have that support HR, because not very many companies are willing to work with cannabis organizations. And so that's been difficult. Things like finding someone that helps with payroll, or finding a vendor that will even offer benefits, employee benefits. Those are all challenges that we face. Um, just last year, we were able to add a 401k option to our employee benefits, but we didn't have that option prior. And so that's one challenge. The other challenge is with recruiting. There's advertising restrictions that kind of tie our hands on the things that we can do to recruit staff. And so it's because of the regulations that we fall under as a cultivator in the state of Arkansas. And so it's been difficult, finding those niche people because, they don't always know that we're looking. Um, because we're tied on what we can do to actually advertise our job openings or post our job openings. Mhm. Not that I'm aware of, and we've got our in-house counsel here that can better answer that question. But as far as I know, there's not a distinction.
How do you guys go about you know, getting I mean, we're in an incredibly tough job market right now as it is. Are there any strategies in ways you try to get the word out?
It's really
Don't get yourself in trouble.
really word of mouth has been the biggest thing with helping us recruit. Um, and then the process itself and just becoming employed, because not only do you complete our application, and apply for the position, but then you've got to go through the process of getting your registry identification card through the ABC, and that is a pretty extensive process. So you complete an application with the ABC, then you are required to go through a state and federal background check and fingerprinting, and that can be a lengthy process. We've seen it take as much as 3 to 4 weeks to go through that process, and then by that time, that applicant may have found another job and taken that job offer because they need to work now, and so.
Have you ever considered hiring someone conditionally, conditional hire based on passage of the federal state background check and getting approved, or do you have to actually get that background
We actually have to have that background check, and then the ABC has to issue what they call a RIC card in order for the employee to perform any work for us.
No way around.
So no way around it. So you've got that lengthy wait process, whereas a lot of our applicants are needing work, as quickly as they can. So I would say those have been the two biggest challenges that we face.
One other wage and hour landmine I want to say about, I see this a lot. People say, well, we're not going to hire them as an employee. We're just going to hire them as an independent contractor. And we won't take any taxes out of their paycheck. Maybe we'll have them again, maybe we won't. That'll blow up in the face quite quickly. If you're hiring someone to do a job that is traditionally done by an employee, like you or someone working in a facility, and you try to make that person an independent contractor, you're going to get in trouble with not only the Department of Labor, Fair Labor Standards Act, Government Minimum Wage Act, you can probably get in trouble with, I know the IRS, the Department of Workforce Services, workers' comp. So, again, there are all sorts of landmines, especially for the cannabis industry, all sorts of difficulties. But, the last thing you want to do is really get your business, on the verge of really getting going and get hit with a lawsuit. What other things do you see on the ground? I've got to kind of I can sit in my office and tell people, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that. But you're actually on the ground. You're right there. What other challenges do you really see from your perspective?
For us at NSM, we have limited staff and HR, and so we try our best to look at those big issues or the landmines that you talk about that can get us in trouble. But we also try to engage our employees the best we can, because we know that, without our employees, we wouldn't be successful. And one of the things that, as a startup company, is creating policies and procedures. That has taken, a lot of time to get policies and procedures put into place. And then we also want to see if those policies and procedures are working for our employees and hear feedback from them on things that we need to adjust or change. But the other thing is COVID has been, this over, never going away thing that just keeps pounding us at NSM, and we find ourselves taking a tremendous amount of time doing contact tracing and reaching out to folks who've been in close contact, and then OSHA has regulations where we have to list, work-related exposures and things like that we are trying to stay on top of. So
I would guess remote work is not a huge option for you.
And remote work is not a huge option for us. We do have some employees who work remotely from time to time, but for the most part, our people are on site each and every day. And it's just keeping up with all the changes that go on from day to day. One day you think you have COVID down, and then the CDC will change things up on us, and then we've got to relearn what we thought we already knew. But it is, fun industry to work in. Lots of great people. They come to work. They work hard every day for us, and so we're truly appreciative of our employees.
Your employees kind of go through an interview process. Once you get an employee or an applicant in the door, you kind of go through the traditional interview process with them, and they take on more of a normal kind of employment on-ramping type process, or is it,
Yeah, so
are there difficulties there too?
There are. One of the things that that I did when I came on board was put together an interview process. And a lot of times people don't think that it's important to have those standard set of questions that you ask everybody so that you don't get these claims of discrimination or things like that. And not to say that you won't get those claims because you can do everything right and somebody can still file a claim. But if you've got your documentation there to show that you treated everybody fairly when you're considering them for a position, you're less likely to get yourself in trouble. So I put together, an interview process.
Kind of a template for
A
people to
template.
follow.
And we have a set of standard questions, and then of course you can add follow-up questions or things, but you at least need to have a list of standard questions that you ask everybody that's granted an interview.
How many of you actually participate in interviews? A few people. Okay. Let me tell you some questions not to ask. I think it's incredibly smart to have a template, to have, here's our standard list of questions that we're going to ask. Let me tell you some questions that you really shouldn't ask. It's fine to ask, are you old enough to do this job? It's not fine to ask, how old are you? When did you graduate from high school? If I'm applying at your place, and you're asking me those types of questions, and I don't get the job, I'm going to start wondering, what, 55? Maybe they're looking for a younger kid to fill this job. It creates your perception. Maybe there's a problem. It's okay to ask an applicant, can you do this job? And it's always nice to kind of have a written job description as well. It's accurate and kind of sets out the job duties for each position. You don't want to ask them, hey, do you have any medical issues? What? Do you have a history of workers' comp injuries? Those are going to get you in trouble. Those are going to get you in trouble.
You don't even want to ask questions like, do you have a patient card?
Right.
Those types of things will get you in trouble.
You never want to ask someone, are you pregnant? Are you planning on getting pregnant? We need workers. It'll get you in trouble. It'll get you in trouble every time. What you really jump in here if you want to, you really want to ask questions that are pertinent to whether this person can do the job. And their age, their race, their gender, those things don't have anything to do with that. So, if you decide to put together a template or a list of questions, I think that's a great idea. But be sure that you're asking the right questions.
Correct.
And not the wrong questions. Religion is another, question you really don't want to ask. What does religion have to do with someone's ability to do the job? Sometimes religion comes up. Here's the context. We work 7 days a week, and we may need you to work for us. There are certainly some religions out there, I think Seventh-day Adventists, for instance, that they can't work from, Friday evening to Saturday. If you have someone like that, I'd love to work here, but I can't work this slot. The response is, we'll try to work with you. We'll try to reasonably accommodate this request. But ordinarily, you don't bring religion up yourself. They bring it up. You can talk about it and address it if you need to. Any horror stories that you want to share from the interview process? I know I may be catching you cold on that. But
I can't think of any horror stories off the top of my head. I think my managers or the managers at MSM do a good job of conducting proper interviews. A lot of things that I see take place is just forgetting that we've got those standard sets of questions that we need to be asking everybody, so that if someone didn't get the job and they want to question that, and then the relevant questions, really getting an idea of what that person's skill sets are, what their experience has been, and making sure that it coincides with and the educational piece of it as well too. Plays a big part. So if you've got a job description that says a bachelor's degree is required for that position, and you hire somebody who only has, high school education, that could be a problem if you pass over somebody who actually had a bachelor's degree. So you need to be watching for those kinds of things.
That's a really good point. If you're going to have a written job description, you better be ready to follow.
Yeah.
You know, maybe one workaround is to say bachelor degree preferred as opposed to bachelor degree required. But yeah, when you do start putting things in life, it's job description, template for interviews, handbook, you better be ready to follow. Because it really looks weird from an employment standpoint, from a discrimination standpoint. You've got to set a rules that you just throw out the door. Let's talk about handbooks. How many of you have a handbook? I mean, so several. Okay. Um, regardless of your size, I think especially when you get to 9-person level, I think it's important to have at least a rudimentary handbook in place. And I think there's certain core things, at least from my perspective. Angela may have others too that she can add to that. I think it's very important to have some sort of EEO statement. We are an equal opportunity employer. We don't discriminate for national origin, religion, race, those types of things. I think it's very important to have anti-harassment and retaliation provisions. Um, you know, this is maybe about 4 years ago, the Me Too movement really came on strong, and that's continued. I don't think COVID has really put much of a dent. You need a harassment. And in that policy, you need to tell people, you need to define what harassment is. You need to tell people how to complain. You need to tell people to whom to complain. And you need a provision that says we're not going to retaliate against you. And also, we're not going to retaliate against you if you're a witness. Falsification of business records, I think, is another good handbook, good core provision I like to see. That applies to the falsification of, say, an application. Falsify your job to get in the door. That also comes in play with time cards too. Whether they're electronic or paper or whatever. I think you really want to tell people, especially your hourly employees, especially, you need to record the time out. And don't inflate your time. And certainly don't walk off the time. That will get you through.
That's it's interesting you say that because some people think that they can call up an hourly employee at home and say, "Hey, I need you to, you know, type this email or do this or do that for me, real quick." But technically, they're an hourly employee; they have to be compensated for that time, and so you want to make sure that if they're not there to actually punch the clock, then you reach out to your HR person or someone to say, "Hey, we need to fix this time card because they actually work from this period of time to this period of time for me working on a special project or whatever it is."
And with everyone with smartphones and texting back and forth, it's just so easy for a manager to be in a bind, need some information. So I know who knows this. I know who can take care of this. Just because it's after hours doesn't mean it's time that has to be paid. Another problem we see too is people who want to take work home with them. A lot of times that's in more of the office type setting, the non-manual labor type setting. But that gets you in trouble as well. And even if you don't condone it, if you know an employee is working off the clock, you're going to be on the hook. Curious to know that any of y'all have drug and alcohol or something like that. There's one. I think that it's given the industry, I think it's an interesting question. You want, and I suspect, and I know this actually, a significant number of your employees are probably part of it. So they're using medical marijuana. And you want to encourage them. You want them to, if they need it, you want them to use it. At the same time, you want them to show up to work able to do their job, not impaired, whether it's from cannabis, whether it's from alcohol, or something else. And I think sometimes businesses in the industry kind of have a hard time balancing that. Frankly, okay, where do we draw the line? From my standpoint, the rules that were enacted, I never have quite figured out how this works. But here's Amendment 98, the medical marijuana amendment that was passed in November of 2016, has a process for the amendment to be amended by the General Assembly. And the General Assembly did come in and amended the amendment to include several employment-related provisions, including giving employers the ability to designate a job as safe and sensitive. Typically, you're going to see that when an employee is driving a lot, or when an employee is using some sort of equipment, things like that. But of course, it's not mandatory. You don't have. I have clients who are very strict about any sort of medical, any sort of drug use on site during work hours. And I have some clients who are very laid back about, okay, if you want to bring medical marijuana to work, that's fine. You can smoke it in the facility, take it outside. You want to bring, edibles or something like that, we're fine with that. How do y'all kind of approach that?
Well, yeah, so we do have a drug and alcohol policy at work, and our states that we would conduct drug and alcohol testing for post-accident or reasonable suspicion. And what we did is we decided to have some positions that are classified as safety sensitive, and so therefore, you can't use and be working in those positions. What we've said in our policy is that if you are a card holder and you have a reason to have to use, we need to know about that, beforehand. And so, how is that pretty much how we're handling it? Did I miss anything there? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's you kind of get in touch two ways, both ways, and it's sometimes hard to find balance. I think another thing that you need in any basic handbook is kind of code of conduct. These are the things that are going to really get you in trouble. These are the things that are going to get you fired. And it could be violence and violence. It could be falsifying your time. It could be harassment. It could be retaliation. What other what I know you got a handbook. What are some of the other things that can get you in trouble at your place?
We all of those things that you mentioned are cause for concern for us, and we certainly don't want to see our employees doing that. But we use what we call a progressive discipline process, and so if it's not something that's extremely bad that somebody's doing, then we try to work with our employees to say, hey, we need to correct this behavior. And if you can't correct that behavior, then you're put on a performance improvement plan and then eventually let go. But for the most part, like I said, stealing time, coming to work under the influence, stealing, things like that will get you out the door real fast.
We talked a little bit about managers. They can make you or break, especially if you're lower level. I've worked with a variety of companies. Almost always, they have the best influence. They want to do it right. And they have managers who I think if you've got a handbook, you've got managers, you need to consider having, if you've got an HR person, if you've got an in-house lawyer, you got a lawyer outside that can help you out. It's never a bad idea to put your manager through some sort of, yeah, I'll do that. I'll do you sort of, you may do that.
We do. So we started with monthly trainings that we try to conduct for our managers, although we haven't had time to do that in the last few months, but we do plan to pick that back up starting next month.
Doing monthly is great. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm glad when my clients do it on a yearly basis. So I think you're ahead of the game.
Well, I don't know that our managers always appreciate having to sit through it, but we certainly feel that it's important for them to understand why we have certain rules and policies in place, and the fact that if you don't follow them consistently with everyone, that it can get you in trouble. A lot of times, especially with our organization, we have folks who have, been working in a, hourly position, and then they get promoted, and they've formed friendships with those with their coworkers, and when they move up to, a management position or something, it's kind of hard for them to separate the relationship, and they may want to favor, that coworker, and so we have to help them understand that you can't do that. You've got to be fair and consistent with everybody when it comes to enforcing the rules and policies and procedures.
And that's a hard thing to do. I think that's kind of where the training can come into play. Not only will help educate the manager on what our policies are, but these are the things that you need to be doing. I think it helps with consistency. You said it, consistency. That's 90% of the game. You can show you're being consistent in the treatment of your employees. You're almost confident. It's when you have the inconsistency that you can really get in trouble. A couple other things that I do now in training. I tell managers, number one, you got to do the above. You may have an employee that just rates you, just rubs you the wrong way. You just can't show it. You can't let them see you well. You go home, go for a run, go exercise, punch the wall if you have to, but don't let your frustrations come out at work. Even if you have an employee that is acting like a fool, you just have to remain professional. And the second thing I always tell people, you're a manager, you're held to a high standard.
Right.
Just because one of your employees does something stupid doesn't mean you can. And I think it's very important to emphasize those type of things with new managers.
As new managers especially, and one of the things that I like to tell our managers is that, you lead by example. And so you may think that something you're doing or something you said was no big deal, but it may be a big deal to the folks that are looking up to you. For instance, if you go to lunch with one employee and you didn't go with the rest of the employees that you manage, that can be perceived as you favoring that employee, even though it's just an innocent, hey, I'm going to grab a phone if you want to join me, type thing. So you have to be careful when you're not only what you say, but the things that you do and how you interact with all of your employees. The other thing that I like to tell our managers is that take some time to do a self check. Look at how you're operating. Are there things that you're doing that are helping contribute, in a positive way to the culture of your organization as a whole, or are there things that you're doing that could be putting a little bit of a damper on the culture? So it's just, nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. We do, do things that weren't necessarily intended or come out with the intended outcome. But just be willing to learn and grow and analyze and look at yourself and see, are there things that I can do to make the work environment
talking about interacting with your employees, especially manager employee interactions. Email, text messaging, uh, social media. Those are all great things, great ways to communicate. But just know anything. Here's my rule: if you're going to put something in an email, if you're going to put something in a text message to an employee, um, make sure you be comfortable seeing it on the front page of the Democrat.
Very
That that is not a good place to say something stupid, especially if you're a new manager, because you're a manager. You represent the company. You represent the business, and juries don't care. They're managers. They don't care if you get on the job 1 day, 10 years.
right. And so
You're
there's
managing.
right. And so there's, and that's what going back to, you being used to being that person's peer. Now you're their manager. The lingo or the language or the text messages and conversations that you had with them when you were, their peer, um, they need to change probably. So you need to pay attention to, like I said, how you communicate with that person.
Anything else you want to talk about from the standpoint of being in the trenches?
I think this is anything. I mean, we've got a great group of people. Um, we're all growing and learning, and things are changing constantly. And so it's kind of like building the plane as you're trying to fly it, But for the most part, we work well together, and I'm just glad that NSN has seen the value in having HR staff on board and making sure that we have things running smoothly and keep us out of trouble. Because any small mistake could cause a regulatory agency to come in and investigate.
Questions?